Amongst the flurry of moves the Edmonton Oilers made on the first day of free agency over the summer were signing veteran forward Jeff Skinner. Skinner is off to a slow start his first season in Edmonton, and we're going to peel back the curtain and diagnose what is up. The former Calder Trophy winner.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can enjoy the NFL season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, as I had teased earlier in the week, yesterday's show as well, we are going to spend today's episode talking about veteran NHL forward Jeff Skinner and his first season in Edmonton as it's unfolded. Our opening segment, we are going to look at the context of his play, meaning how much time on ice is he getting, what situations, zone starts, most common line mates, most common defensive players. We're going to analyze the quality of competition Skinner is getting. We're going to do that against the context of his play last year in Buffalo, the line mates he played with there, the responsibilities, his assignments, if you will. Our second segment, we're going to go under the hood. We are going to look at the possession stats. The transition stats I would like to cite haven't been published yet because there haven't been enough games played so far this season. But whenever all three zones does publish their first wave of possession of transition stats, I'll definitely be sure to loop those into future conversations. And then our final segment, we're going to diagnose / make an assessment of Skinner's play using the information we've discussed over the first few segments. So, let's start with the big picture. We all know that Jeff Skinner was bought out of his contract in Buffalo, that the Sabres signed him to an above market value contract because that was a team, the Sabres, that has historically struggled to maintain and acquire quality players. Jeff Skinner is a really, really solid hockey player. I would not say Jeff Skinner is great. I wouldn't say he has any elite traits. I would say he is a really solid hockey player. On a Stanley Cup team, he is probably a second or third line wing. In Buffalo, he spent significant time on the first line and over the last handful of seasons, second line, getting primary power play unit time and getting real opportunities to play with the Sabres' best players, whether that be Rasmus Dahlin, Tage Thompson, Dylan Cousins, Alex Tuch, Jack Eichel previously before he got hurt, before he got traded, I should say. And he was never going to live up to that contract. But as I always say here, free agency is like grocery shopping hungry, and the Sabres were starving. So they overpaid for a player. They gave him every opportunity to be successful. But at a certain point, that contract was no longer worth it. And the Sabres made the decision, we would rather pay the penalty, the buyout penalty, recapture penalty going forward, and let him go somewhere else. So that naturally leads Skinner to decide one of a few things. Number one, what type of team do I want to go to? Do I want to play top line minutes on a bad team? Do I want to take a deal like Tyler Toffoli took to sign with the Sharks? Or do I want to try and recapture some of my market value? I know I'm never going to get $9 million a year on a contract ever again. I am too old. I have too many miles, and no one is ever going to give me that type of volume. But if I can parlay one good counting stats season into a medium-term contract, if I can play really well and play myself into a 4 or 3 year deal in my early 30s, that would be a massive win for me, my family, my agent. And that was the idea on paper here. If you are Jeff Skinner, you sign with the Oilers for two reasons. Number one, you are signing with a Stanley Cup contender. And then number two, you are going to get the opportunity, at least at even strength, to play with Leon Draisaitl or Connor McDavid. Coming into the season, the conjecture was, that Draisaitl was going to play with Skinner was going to play with Draisaitl and Victor Arvidsson. We'll do another episode on Arvidsson at some point, but being that he's injured, I don't feel it's as fair to try and compare his numbers with the games he's missed to what he's done historically, especially considering he missed a lot of time last year with injury as well, only playing in 15 or so regular season games as a King before the playoffs, etc. So with all of that in mind, Jeff Skinner is coming to Edmonton for a reduced role. He's going to play less minutes than he did in Buffalo. He's going to play lower in the lineup. He's going to play on lines with lower quality players. He's going to be on a line where the primary responsibility is not necessarily going to be creating offense. So I'm going to click over to my notes here. And when I look at the notes, number one, Skinner is the 8th or 9th most commonly used forward. When we go by time on ice per game, in order, it's McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent-Hopkins, Hyman, Henrique, Victor Arvidsson, Connor Brown, Matthias Janmark, then Jeff Skinner. The last 2 games they've played, Corey Perry has finished with more time on ice than Skinner. Perry plays on that first power play unit in Zach Hyman's absence, so that's why over the last few games without Hyman, Perry's been getting more minutes. Jeff Skinner is averaging 13 minutes, 44 seconds per game. That is the lowest average time on ice of his entire NHL career. He is getting 12:49 per game at even strength on average. He's getting 54 seconds of power play time. That is, of course, on the second power play unit. And Jeff Skinner, of course, does not kill penalties. His most common line mates so far this season, 47 minutes, 46 seconds with Adam Henrique and Connor Brown on the third line. We've seen him there recently. Then, in the absence of Connor McDavid for those few weeks and at various points when they were playing Draisaitl with McDavid and playing Draisaitl, McDavid, Podkolzin, Nugent-Hopkins and Zach Hyman with Jeff Skinner at 44 minutes, 1 second. And then the third most common, what we started the year with, Draisaitl and Victor Arvidsson, that's 34.5 minutes exactly. All of those numbers are at 5-on-5 for time on ice. Next, quality of competition. This is one of the arguments for why Skinner should probably be producing a bit more. But this is the lowest quality of competition for Jeff Skinner in 5 seasons. Since his first year in Buffalo, this is the most Skinner has played against lower quality players. 35.4% of his time versus middle 6 forwards and 34% versus what would be defined as grit forwards. Puck IQ is a database that tracks quality of competition for players. It's a very useful tool. I highly encourage you to check it out. And then his most common defensemen that he gets to play with at 5-on-5 are Brett Kulak, Ty Emerson, Troy Stetcher. And I want to talk about this in the context of responsibility. Because when you're Jeff Skinner and you're playing with Tage Thompson and Alex Tuch on the Buffalo Sabres, your job is to score as many goals as possible because you're on your team's best line. It's okay if you give stuff back defensively because your line's function is supposed to be chance creation. It is volume, it is creating offense, and trying to score as many goals as possible because you are on the team's best line. Now, Edmonton, lower in the lineup, playing with Henrique and Connor Brown, playing with Nugent, Hyman, playing at points with Draisaitl and Arvidsson, though we haven't seen that in a while. We're probably going to see Podkolzin stay on Draisaitl's wing because of the synergy they found together. But it's important. All of this context sets the table for what we're going to talk about in the next segment, as in the possession stats, the counting stats, and trying to put this all within the frame of we can explain why Skinner isn't putting up the counting stats that maybe some had thought he would. This is a forward who had 46 points last year, had 20 some odd goals, really hasn't found the back of the net, but I think that's a little bit more indicative of team-wide Oiler issues, and we're going to talk more about that coming up next. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers. With the seasons changing, I'm already dreaming of a warm weather getaway. I love using points for travel, and I'm always looking for ways to earn more to book my next flight. Here's a life hack for you. Built lets you earn points on rent payments and redeem them towards flights, hotels, and a whole lot more. One of your biggest investments should get you more than just a roof over your head. There's no cost to join Built, and as a member, you'll earn valuable points on rent and your everyday spending. Built points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even the ones you haven't heard of. There are over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels and properties around the world you can redeem your Built points toward. Points can also be redeemed towards future rent payment and unique experiences that only Built members can access. So if you're not earning points on rent, my question is, why not? Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl. That's joinbilt.com/lockedonnhl. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. One more time, that's joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl to start earning points on your rent payments today. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. You guys know me. I love getting out there, going to games, going to concerts. This week, I am going to both a game and a concert. Tonight, I should say Wednesday, I am going to Devil's Blues because I would like to avoid everybody I went to high school with at my hometown bars the night before American Thanksgiving. Friday, I will be seeing Creed again, second time this year seeing Creed at Madison Square Garden. The only place I buy tickets to go to games, go to shows is through our friends over at Gametime with the best features in the ticket buying industry. You know me, I'm going to plug it every time. The panoramic view in the app before you buy, so you know exactly what you're getting into before you press that button to finalize those tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are honing in on Jeff Skinner's first season in Edmonton and trying to put his numbers in context. And spending an entire 10 minutes to a player's situational context might seem like a bit of overkill, especially if you're not somebody who's particularly versed in some of these statistics. But counting stats are an imperfect measure. And when I say counting stats, I mean goals and assists, because you simply count those. There's not an underlying value. There's not a specific way to calculate it. The goals, we all know what a goal is. We all know what an assist is. But counting stats are not the most accurate measure of a player because so much goes into setting up a goal. You think about the puck recovery in the defensive zone, or if it's an offensive zone or a neutral zone play, a face-off win. You think about the player skating the puck where it needs to go. As we always say here on Locked On Oilers, there's two ways to get a puck where you want it to go. You can skate it there, you can pass it there. You got to do one of those two things to move the puck. Then, once you've established offensive zone possession, have you put the defenders in conflict? Do you have the goalie moving? Do you have a screen? Do you have a redirect? Do you have a rebound opportunity? Have you made the defenders come out of their structure so that you can pick them apart? Do you have room? Can you skate in the offensive zone? And there are so many variables that go into every single play in a hockey game that goals and assists are the most simple way to determine who is good and who isn't. And look, yes, there is a strong correlation between players who put up the most points being the best players. Connor McDavid, typically up there. Nathan McKinnon, typically up there. Leon Draisaitl, Nikita Kucherov. I can go on and on. We know points are important, but they are not the only way to measure a player's impact. That's why we look at things like underlying numbers, like transition stats. And most importantly, that's why we spent 10 minutes talking about the quality of competition, line mates, responsibilities, deployments, because all of that is connected. The most important thing you can have as a hockey player is ice time. You don't play as much as the guys in the other sports when you're a hockey player. You know, soccer players, most of those guys are playing the full 90. Some, you get 5 subs now, so guys will come off and it's a little more fluid, but most of those guys are playing close to the full game. Basketball, the Stars, they're playing 35-ish of the 48 minutes. If you play for Tom Thibodeau, the Knicks coach, you're going to play 42 minutes if you're Josh Hart or OG Anunoby. If you're a baseball player, you play all 9 innings unless you have a liability. You're not particularly fast and they want a pinch runner. Or if you're not that great defensively, they'll get a defensive specialist out there. In hockey, you don't play that many minutes. So the more ice time you get, whether that means playing on the first line at even strength, on the power play, on the penalty kill, The more minutes you have, the more opportunities you have to facilitate points. Points are always going to be the simplest way to measure a player's effectiveness because we can all agree on them and they are indisputable. Now, after that 4-minute preamble, we're going to talk a little bit about chance creation. So, scoring chances, expected goals, high danger chances, those are a more detailed statistic. That is a more detailed measurement of play because there is a strong correlation between chance creation and actual goals. Most seasons of the teams that make the playoffs, the 16 teams that make the playoffs, we have a strong correlation where 14 or 15 of those 16 teams are often the top 14 or 15 teams in chances for and expected goals for and high danger chances for, because we know, and look, every measurement website, whether you want to look at Money Puck, you want to look at Natural Stat Trick, you want to look at Evolving Wild, whatever website you want to use for your measurements, they're all going to be a little bit different. Every statistical model values certain things more. They use different numbers from different databases, but generally, we have enough data now. NHL started doing stat tracking stuff in 2008. We have 15 years of data to support the thesis that chance creation leads to offense. And real quick, because I spent a lot of time introducing the idea, I do want to get the numbers in because I did take the time to go and pull them and do the comparison to his time in Buffalo last year. So this year, Jeff Skinner averages 11.65 shots for per 60, 1.12 individual expected goals per 60, 20.7 individual chances for per 60, 4.31 high danger chances for per 60. All four of those numbers are just Jeff Skinner. Those don't include his line mates. Those don't include the defensemen that are on the ice with them. Those numbers are only at 5-on-5. And all four of them are higher than Jeff Skinner's output last year in Buffalo. When we do his whole line, his rate stats are all higher this year with Edmonton than they were in Buffalo last year. 65.13 chances for per 60, 1.51 goals for per 60. That's low, but we're going to get to the explanation as to why. We'll talk about that more in the final segment. 2.79 expected goals for per 60, 11.43 high danger chances for per 60, and then the key, 4.7 shooting percentage, 890 save percentage. Those numbers tell you that the Jeff Skinner and the Oilers at large are having luck issues. And we've long since established that the Oilers have been having a Murphy's Law type season. And maybe the Rangers win this past Saturday is the turning point. It's the opportunity for the Oilers to start building towards the contender they fancy themselves as. And there's ample time here for the Oilers to get improvement out of Skinner, out of Arvidsson. In Arvidsson's absence, I would love to see Skinner get a little more burn, but very clearly, the Oilers and Chris Knobloch don't see it that way. So we're going to take one final break on today's show, and then we're going to diagnose Skinner and try and figure out how the Oilers might be able to get more out of him coming up after this quick break. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Of course, it is American Thanksgiving this week. That means the Lions at noon, the Detroit Lions hosting the Chicago Bears. The Lions, 10.5-point favorites. The mid-afternoon game, of course, the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys are 3.5-point favorites against the New York Giants. And then the best game of the day, the Miami Dolphins heading up to Green Bay, where it's expected to be a wind chill in the low 20s or high teens, where the Packers are 3.5-point favorites. Head on over to FanDuel.com, where you can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. It's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out here on this Locked On Oilers episode where we are diving all in on Jeff Skinner. And coming into this season, I expected Skinner to get a lot of burn in the top six. I really coming into the season, and you heard me talk about this yesterday on our optimal lineup episode, our third one of the season, I really thought Ryan Nugent-Hopkins playing with Adam Henrique and Connor Brown would be a really ideal third line, the type of line that would salt the game away, that would have a lot of possession, that would be really good on the cycle, that would be really good on the forecheck. And the Oilers have insisted on keeping Ryan Nugent-Hopkins in the top six, which naturally means the only other options for Jeff Skinner are the third or the fourth line, because Vasily Podkolzin has really endeared himself and really solidified himself on playing with Leon Draisaitl. The amount of possession they are able to establish, how well Podkolzin complements what Draisaitl wants to do. So if that partnership is going to stay together, and we're going to assume that Victor Arvidsson's going to stay on Draisaitl's right, that means there are two places for Jeff Skinner. And I know the Oilers at points in the last week or so have played Jeff Skinner on the fourth line. I know they've had some injury issues, so they just kind of need to fill out the lineup. You know, we saw Drake Caggiula, expect Drake Caggiula to be back for Friday's game against Utah, but Jeff Skinner's not a fourth line player. Look, in an ideal world, and I don't really want to go on this tangent because I talk about this way too often all the time, but teams should have guys like Jeff Skinner on the fourth line, but because the league does not want to go entirely away from physicality, from checking, from the type of play you typically see on a fourth line, teams aren't going to put skill there in their lineup. They are going to say, well, we can't play Skinner on our fourth line. We can't play him with Draisaitl because him and Podkolzin get along so well. They play together so well. That means we can play him with Henrique and Connor Brown, and we bump Janmark down to the fourth line, or we play him on the first line with McDavid and Hyman, and we bump Nugent-Hopkins down to the third line, and then that means we slide Janmark down to the fourth line with Perry and Ryan. I, for one, think that's probably their ideal outcome, and I'll tell you why. And I said this on yesterday's show, but I'll reiterate it again in case you missed it, and because this is tied specifically to Skinner. Skinner's best traits are his straight line skating and his shot. He is not going to set guys up. He is not going to forecheck. He is not going to cycle. He is not going to backcheck. You have already established that when McDavid, Hyman, Ekholm, Bouchard, and whoever the other winger that's playing with them when Hyman's healthy, you've established that that group's responsibility is offense at all costs. You are okay with giving chances back at the other end because of the way Bouchard and the way Ekholm play. They are very aggressive on their pinches. They are very, very involved in offensive chance creation. So Skinner, who also is a very involved offensive player, even if he's not a great creator or facilitator, he can take some of the heat off McDavid on the zone entries. I vividly remember talking about this when we did a Jeff Skinner deep dive. I believe it was in August, where even last year on Buffalo, still a pretty good straight line skater, can carry the puck into the offensive zone with speed, draw defenders towards him, and that should, in theory, leave more space for McDavid, for Zach Hyman. But we have seen, even when you carry the puck in on McDavid's line, and the Draisaitl goal against the Rangers last Saturday was a perfect encapsulation of this, where Draisaitl and McDavid were close to each other on the left wall in their own zone. They overlapped with each other. McDavid skates towards the middle, draws two defenders towards him, and leaves Draisaitl a bunch of space. Draisaitl, of course, fills in that space. The defenders move over towards him. Boom, McDavid goal. You are never going to get defenses to respect McDavid's line mates as much as McDavid, because McDavid is the best player in the world. But I fundamentally believe that if the Oilers want to maximize what Jeff Skinner's skill set is at this stage of his career, it's relying on that. It's leaning on his offense. It's letting him do what he's good at. And this will be my parting thought for today's episode before I get us all out of here. And this is Facebook logic. This is fortune cookie wisdom. This is something you hear from the people who didn't go to college. Ask a fish to climb a tree, you're going to be very disappointed. If you ask Jeff Skinner to play with Adam Henrique and Connor Brown, where they're going to spend a lot of time in their own zone, they're going to try and cycle. And look, I know Connor Brown's pretty fast in a straight line. I know Henrique is probably their most defensively responsible center of the four guys they currently roster. The defensemen they're going to get deployed with when they're out there with Stetcher, with Emberson, with Kulak, if Kulak's not playing with Nurse, it's going to be harder for them to get to offense. And Jeff Skinner's not going to do the legwork in the defensive zone to help facilitate breakouts. So that means if we want to get the most out of Skinner, which is straight line skating and his shot, we've got to put him in situations where he can do that. If defenses are going to hone in on McDavid and there's going to be space there for Jeff Skinner, that makes more sense to me. We know Zach Hyman isn't the fastest as a straight line skater, but he's a strong forechecker and he's good around the net. That complements what Skinner does. In a vacuum, if we're talking about skill sets and matching them up, Skinner makes a lot of sense with Hyman and McDavid. And we know McDavid is a gifted goal scorer, but his main, and I talk about this a lot, the idea that you want a facilitator, a goal scorer, and a retriever on a line. That way you have balance, and McDavid can do both, score goals and set them up. Hyman can score them, and he can go after the loose pucks. Skinner, he's really only there to shoot. And playing him with Henrique, playing him with Connor Brown, he's going to probably get more shot opportunities. He's going to get more opportunities to get the puck on net because those guys are less inclined to shoot than he is. But if he's playing with McDavid and he's playing with Hyman, I feel better about possessions ending on Jeff Skinner shots on goal on that line than I do when they're with Henrique and with Connor Brown, because I feel that when they're out there with Ekholm, with Bouchard, with McDavid, with Hyman, that line is going to have a better chance of sustaining offensive zone time, that those skill sets match up a little bit better. And that would commiserate with a bump in time on ice to get him back over that 14-minute mark, to get him closer to what he's in line with for his career. Because the rate stats tell you he is not playing that differently than he has in the past, especially when you look at the individual stats, not the line stats. That tells me he is still getting pucks on net. He still is involved in possession. But the complementary players, the shooting percentage being about half what it is for his career and his line mates, that tells me that something isn't working here. And I don't envy Chris Knobloch's position, because right now he's trying to juggle a very depleted lineup in terms of injuries. He's trying to manage personalities, trying to manage locker room. But this is an idea I think is worth revisiting. I know there were points where they tried this earlier in the year. I know they tried Skinner with Draisaitl and Arvidsson. This is worth revisiting down the road. Now, the Oilers go out and add another forward as opposed to a defenseman, or add one of each. Maybe Skinner stays on the third line and we can force somebody lower in the lineup out of the lineup entirely and get better by deepening the lineup. That's also on the table, but that'll do it for this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I will have an episode for you tomorrow on American Thanksgiving. We're going to talk about what the Oilers should be thankful for. We're going to work it all the way back. We're going to start at the beginning of 2024, the calendar year, and we're going to end up right about now. We'll do that tomorrow. Before we get out of here, please subscribe to Locked On Oilers wherever you get your podcasts. Leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell so you get a notification whenever new content goes live. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. Now for your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey wherever you get your podcasts. I will talk to you guys tomorrow.